Our guest this week is Liz Kerin, who is a screenwriter, a playwright, and a TV writer, and a novelist who's written now 3 books: The Phantom Forest, a dark fantasy, Night's Edge. Here's my copy of Night's Edge. Night's Edge. And you have a brand new one out, which is the second book in this series. First Light, the duology, is published by Nightfire at Tor Books, which is part of Macmillan. Huge changes since I last saw you. And also in development during strike era.
No longer, and we'll talk about that. It's no longer live. Yeah, and I can say a few words about it, but like it was in development, and then the strike happened, and then the world had its way with everything, and corporations being what they are.
The more stories I've been hearing, I think it's also just part of the period we're in, where development is always hard. Let's put it this way. For those of you who are more on the novel side and not on the screenwriting side, what we're talking about is when you have a project where either the IP or a draft or a pitch has been brought by a studio or network, and then you go into something called development to develop the entire series of it. And it's always a hard process. Like a very small percentage of what gets bought actually ends up, on the air. So it's never easy, but it's been particularly hard these last few years. So when I knew you had graduated from NYU School of Drama. Had you written for short films?
I had done a lot of that at NYU. I was a dramatic writing major, so I was doing screenwriting and television and playwriting while I was there. So yeah, we would do like production on short films and stuff like that. And I, like my thesis I had to do there, I wrote 2 features and a TV pilot. So like I had been in LA for about 2 years at that point, and was like, had been an assistant for a while for a producer and then for a manager. And I was just like, cool, I'm meeting lots of great people. I have a really good education and a good network, but what I really need is like just to, kick my butt into gear and write some new samples.
Right.
And yeah, it was a total game changer. I came up with something really cool in your class, and that sample got me my manager. So I was like, that was a great jump start. Thank goodness I took the class.
And are you still with the same manager that you started with?
I am not. But I'm with my same agent who came shortly thereafter. So I stayed with Verve. Yeah. Agent I ever had. So
talk to people, because this is a common question, so we might as well answer it up front. How did you get the manager? How did you get the agent? What did you?
Yeah, I met my manager because I had a really good friend I went to college with who was like a young exec out here who was just a very cool girl who just knew everybody. And it's always nice to have a very social friend like that, because so many of us writers are kind of introverted. So she, this friend of mine, introduced me to my manager, who at the time had like just gotten promoted from being an assistant and was allowed to build her own list. And so we were like the same age. We knew a lot of the same people. We got along great. And I was with her for like 7, 8 years. Like we worked together for a long time. So it's not for nothing.
Yeah, that's great. And it's funny
wonderful.
because I feel like there's often a bias against what I would call starter managers, but
And
I
she
feel
wasn't like
like,
that.
that's
No.
exactly who you want to be with in those early years. Somebody who cares, who wants to build their list, wants you to succeed.
The only reason I kind of didn't stay there ultimately had to do with the book thing, because for the past several years now, kind of like the bulk of my daily work and my income was coming from books, and they didn't really do books, and I was having to pay. There's a whole other conversation we could have about commission structures for books versus film and television. But the long and the short of it was like I had too many people on my team, and I was paying too large a chunk in commissions, and I was getting older, and I had bills to pay, and had a life that didn't.
But you didn't have to pay a commission on the books to your screenwriting manager, did you?
So here's where that comes in. So my screenwriting and television not manager, agent is also where my book agent is.
Right,
So,
at her. Okay.
Yeah. So book agents take 18%, and 15%.
15.
15, and then managers take 10.
Right.
And then we were negotiating, trying to, it's a long conversation about money and percentages, and it was silly, but it was just like, and also, having managers stop making sense because they weren't, giving me like detailed feedback on my manuscripts, and they weren't really, involved in the process of getting it submitted, finding an editor, working that deal. They
I was gonna
weren't,
say, I'm
do that. Yeah.
surprised that that would even be part of their expectation that they would get a cut of any book deal.
Yeah,
I
I
wonder
was
if
able
that's
to negotiate a lighter cut in the end, but it still didn't make sense that I had to, but it was just because I had been with them for so long
oh,
and had kind of first floated the idea of this whole book series when I was with them. So everything was kind of just connected because I'd been with the same group for a long time. So I just kind of had to simplify after so many years and just kind of wanted everything in one place. That was all.
that makes a
But
lot of
yeah,
uh,
and then I
so
got
is
my,
your manager, do you have a manager at all, or
I don't know.
no, you just work with your agent? Okay.
Hmm.
And how did you end up getting your agent?
That was when I sold my first project. I only had a manager then, but I was in like, a development writer's room for features at a production company, and they bought one of my ideas and took me to script. And so my manager was like, "Oh, so now like you are really working. Let's find you an agent who can do more stuff with you." So that was just how that happened. It made sense to do it then, which I thought was a good idea because then I was already working on something and making money on something. So it was like, oh, they'll actually make phone calls for me.
And
So
then did you get the book agent through your TV screen agent, or did they kind of find you separately?
it was through my TV agent. I mean, I was kind of hunting her down. Like I knew who she was already. She joined Verve several years ago, and I had like seen the Deadline article, and I was like, "Oh, I know who that is. Oh, that's super cool. She's on their team now." So I emailed my feature agent, and I was like, "So, can I have a meeting with her? I want to talk to her." And so that was kind of like how I got in the back door with their book department because I had been querying for a long time and it was very hard. I got a lot of manuscript requests, which made me feel really good, but ultimately, um, they didn't pan out. So you get the self-esteem boost every time they want to read more, but then you're like, oh, someone just freaking signed me. So so that was ultimately how I did it. I just kind of said, hey, can I have a meeting? I'm going to convince them to sign me. So I don't know.
Oh, that's okay. That's great. So full disclosure, because I didn't actually realize this again, there's also there's like weird ways in which life in LA gets very connected.
I know.
But full disclosure, we have had Liz on this YouTube cast as
Ah,
well.
she's the best. Yeah.
So you guys can look up the video if you want. But
Yeah.
um
Liz is very wise and just like such a real talker. Like I trust her very much because like she'll tell me when something is not going to happen. She won't sugarcoat it. She'll give me really good notes. But that also means when she really, really likes something and believes in something, she means it. She doesn't just like, blow smoke at you. So I really appreciate her candor like all the time.
so that project that you wrote way back when, that was the one that got you the manager, but then you were out there pitching features and all the rest of that. At what point did you decide I'm going to sit down and write the Phantom Forest? Were you already writing that? Like, had you been writing that all along, or
Yeah.
was it just more like, nope, one day I'm like, I'm going to sit down and write a book?
I actually wrote that book while I was still an assistant. I was like working on it on my lunch breaks in like Google Docs, when the phones were dead, etc. So it was kind of already done. And this it was this weird timing thing where I had submitted it to the Launchpad manuscript competition that they used to do,
For that,
and it got really far. And so the publishing sponsor, which was Inkshares at the time, like offered me a contract because of how it did in that competition and the way people on their site responded to the sample. So I was like, great, I'll take it. Because I'm so sick of trying to query this one when I know it's working and I like it. So I said yes to them. And then it was only after that that I got Liz on my team and she was officially my agent. So she couldn't really do anything with that one at the time. She was like, "Oh, you signed this somewhere. This is set up." Okay. So that was like Phantom Forest was already done. It was being edited. It had, a date to be published. So Liz really came aboard after that one when I started developing the Night's Edge book. So that's kind of when we really started working hard together. Yeah.
So people understand a little bit more about like the contests and how that kind of publishing works. It's a little bit foreign to me as well, actually, to be quite
So
honest.
foreign to me, and I did it. So
It's like I come from Big Five publishing. I
no.
really don't understand like how people, like the other kinds of options that are available.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
what is that publishing like when you like win this, or you place in the contest or you rise in the contest and then they give you a contract? What does that look like?
Well, there's no advance, first of all. So if you're expecting one, good luck to you. Um, and I didn't know that. So I was like, that was kind of my first, oh, that's a surprise. There's no advance. Okay. Um, and I mean, the difference is you get a larger share of the royalties later on once it
Oh,
comes
you do.
out than you would in trad publishing. So that's like a good thing. And you don't ever have to like break even. You don't have to earn out. So that's good. But the flip side is, a lot of these smaller companies that sponsor these competitions, they know that you don't have an agent. They know this is your first book and they know that you don't know. So, I did feel like they took advantage of a lot of loopholes that I was simply not aware of. And the marketing and publicity left a lot to be desired. I thought they were going to do so much more. But that's also, by the way, something that happens in traditional publishing anyway, where sometimes like the marketing department totally drops the ball on you anyway. So I was like, well, I would have had to have been doing like a lot of social media regardless, probably. But they did an okay job. And I know the book turned out well. And I really liked the editor that they paired me with. He was
I
lovely.
was gonna say, so they did give you an editor.
Yeah,
Okay.
and he did a wonderful job with me. We came out with something where I was really proud of. Overall, I'm like really glad that book existed because it definitely put my name out there. It wasn't a huge, huge release by any means, but people had read it and it was well received. It got good reviews. So I was like, okay, good enough. I have been published. I'm out there. People seem to like it.
Yeah.
I barely made any money off of it, but that's okay. And so it gave me the springboard to, and the confidence really, it was so much about the confidence to say like, I can write another one and maybe I can sell that to a larger publisher and get a bigger deal. So that was like my strategy for the following year. I was like, I'll write a new one. I'll do this.
Right.
So that was the goal.
What's the thing on Twitter where you kind of you put out your log line and then
Oh, Pit Mad.
pick
Was the
match and stuff like that?
yeah.
I'm often very encouraging. Like I think so many first novels just go into the drawer, so I'm always like, look, if you can get it published in any which way, as long as you don't get too discouraged about that process, it could be
Yeah.
a really valuable thing.
Yeah, I was discouraged at the time. I think
Yeah.
like when it first kind of when the galleys first came out and the reviews up top were really positive, I was like on top of the world. I was like, "Oh my God, people like it. This is amazing. People are enjoying the advanced copies. This is the
Right.
best." So I'm like, "So now what? Now what do we do?" And that was kind of like it. Like,
Yeah.
"Oh, and then it will come out and more people hopefully will read it." Like that's it. So
Right.
I was encouraged at first and then confused and bummed out. Um, and it took me a while to like get over that and to understand what it meant in the greater context. So,
Yeah. Well, and also you just never know. I mean, the other weird thing about publishing that I think a lot of people don't understand is that stuff can have weird second lives. Like you could think something's dead and it can come back. And, I mean, there's just so many examples of long tail
oh my
weird
God.
things. So
I remember like realizing when the Colleen Hoover thing hit Book Talk a couple of years back, like I'd never heard of her, and to realize that like those books that everyone was having a meltdown about on TikTok were like 4 years old. And I was
Yeah,
like, oh, this isn't a brand new writer or anything. And
yeah,
then like the next one that blew up, the Rebecca Yarros book, Fourth Wing, she'd been writing other genres for years and then was like, hey, maybe fantasy. Ugh. You
yeah,
just
yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, no, Adrian McKinty had written all these Irish policeman
Mhm.
novels, and then, but he blew up when he tried to do, thriller, and that he had like that one very high concept about the chain, and then boom,
Mhm.
like all of a sudden he's big, and now all of a sudden people are buying the policeman. But anyway,
Yeah,
yeah,
it
shit
happens.
happens, sorry. But it's not predictable. You don't know. That's why I'm kind of like, if somebody did want to publish you, go ahead, but just be okay. Kind of like with development in TV, be okay with moving on. It's my advice.
Yeah. And I wish you had said that or someone had said that to me that year because it
Yeah.
took me a while to like be like, all right, guess we're
I think
right.
I say it all the
One.
time, but people
Yeah.
don't, it's very hard to hear it is what happens,
Mm-hmm.
like, especially like you say, when reviews come out and your expectations are raised, and so it's very hard to hear it. And it is disappointing when marketing doesn't quite match the critical reception or whatever it is. So,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
And that, but again, that can happen in any capacity in any larger company too. So
can happen even if they paid you, $1 million.
I know.
Marketing can just not. I think, from the publisher point of view, which I know most authors don't want to hear, but the truth is, like, it's hard to control what people want, and things like word of mouth through TikTok. I mean, these are the way a lot of books like pop off, and
Mhm.
publishers get frustrated too that they can't control that more. But
Yeah.
it
I
isn't always the easiest.
Yeah, I think that's true on one hand, but I also will say in defense of authors who have felt shortchanged by their publisher, yeah, like I know the like I receive galleys for like all the other books that are on my imprint. I can see the marketing plans for all the other books, and I have seen the books for which it's clear they're doing a bigger push. I've seen those do better.
Yeah,
So I'm
no,
like,
and
there's
believe
no
me, I'm
substitute.
not
For,
denying that at
yeah.
all. Yeah, like if
So
you
if
put money
they
behind something, it does help.
Yeah, if they make a plan and give the money to it, it will do better. It just will. So, look,
100%.
but you're right. You never can tell.
Phantom was dark fantasy. How
Hmm.
did you get into, tell me the whole origin story for Night's Edge. Like, how did you come up with this idea? Why vampires? Why mother-daughter? I think it's such a fascinating sort of revolutionary, twist on the usual boy-girl vampire story. I love it. And I just want to hear all about like how that originated.
Yeah. Well, I had come up with this idea. I wanted to have a story where I could unpack themes about codependency, toxic relationships within families, enmeshment in families, and how those patterns manifest and are carried down, between generations and all that really complicated psychological upsetting stuff that I personally was like trying to unpack in my own day-to-day life, and my therapist was tired of hearing of it. So like I was like, how do I capture all these really complex thoughts and feelings I'm having that I have a lot to say about? Um, but I'm a dark fantasy writer. What am I doing like with this idea? And the idea came to me actually several years ago because I was thinking maybe I wanted to do it as like a feature indie film because I
That
had
was
this,
going to be my other question, is like, did this start in another format and then go in?
yeah, I had always this idea, like one of the first scenes in the Night's Edge book is this scene where like Mia, the daughter, is like having a very ordinary dinner time with her mom, and they're just chatting like everything's cool and everything's fine. And then all of a sudden, Mia like gives her blood while she's just like eating a normal sandwich. And she's like, oh, by the way, here. Like, and you're just like, oh, that's her. Oh, her mom's a vampire. And she's just giving her blood every day like it's normal, like it's nothing. Um, And meanwhile, like this poor girl is like anemic and not well and, doesn't have a life outside this and doesn't seem to care. And that was always like the image I had of these characters. And I wish I could tell you exactly how I got from, hey, I want to talk about toxic family relationships and enmeshment. I wish I could say how I went from that to vampires, like what that bridge actually was. I don't really know. All I know is that it was like asking myself, what genre tropes remind me of this dynamic?
Oh, interesting.
Like
Okay.
vampires are parasitic by nature, and they literally take the lifeblood out of another healthier person.
Right.
So I'm like, well, that sounds like a parent who's taking too much and asking too much of their children.
That's so interesting. It's almost like you go back to, the roots of Dracula and how that really did start out as a pretty freaking grounded relationship story. And then and then but you
Yeah.
transpose the relationship and yeah, and you get to your book.
Yeah, so that was the always, what I set out to do. And then, a lot of world building had to come in around that. So how did her mom get this disease? Is it more of a disease than like being a vampire? And I decided like, yes, I don't want to glamorize her vampiric condition. I want people to feel sorry for her mom too, that this even happened. So I'm like, I want to make sure that it's a sickness that she didn't have control over getting, and so we feel some empathy, and to not make it seem, and to make sure it's like clear that it sucks to be a vampire in this world. It's not sexy. It's
Yeah.
just a bummer.
Do
So
you see it as an abuse novel or do you see it more as a codependency novel?
I see it as codependency, but it's really interesting. Everybody's definition of abuse, I think, can be very, very personal. So I don't like to put that label on it. But if readers are digesting it and reading it like that, I completely understand. So,
Yeah,
you know,
no, it's interesting because just jumping off what you were saying about creating empathy, like, I mean, I think in general, I look at things through a pretty empathetic lens. So I was very, I felt sorry for the mom. And then I saw somebody describe it as an abuse novel. I was like, wait,
right.
is she?
So, yeah, well, no, I think that's what's been really fascinating talking to audiences about the story is, how you experience a story only through your worldview. Your lens is only yours.
Right.
So if you're in a place in your life where you've experienced mistreatment, abuse, or you're grappling with like, how do I mentally deal with people who have hurt me in my past? I'm gonna call it like I see it. I call it abuse. And, I think that, yeah, I think that there's gray area I like to play with in all of my work. And I think Izzy represents like all of the grayest gray area I could possibly do.
I think
So
so. I do think so. I
yeah,
mean, in a way, yeah, because it really does depend where you're coming from. Like, I
yeah.
could see this as just a novel about, breaking away from your family, like independence and freedom and all that.
I'm not excusing all the stuff Izzy does. Like she's a bad mom.
Yeah.
And he doesn't, she takes from her daughter way more than she ever should.
Right,
Um,
right.
but yeah, the point is if you hate her, I respect that and you are allowed.
Yeah. No, totally, 100%. No, it's like you said. I think it just depends where you're coming from, and I do find that in writing this stuff, it's a little bit hard. Like my short film was about a mother-daughter relationship, and I realized like I just constantly felt on the edge of the precipice, in terms of like, am I making either one of these people seem like really bad people?
Yeah.
Because the daughter has to care for her mother in that one. And,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
very easy.
I think also a lot of people who've been through something like that, who've been in a caretaker role, understand a lot of that nuance.
Yeah, for sure.
Because this is about the advantage that people who get taken advantage of when they're in a caretaker situation, which is at its heart altruistic and comes from a place of love that then, goes septic, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and
So
it's a hard thing to explain to somebody unless they've felt it. So that's another reason that I'm just like, I'm not going to pontificate and tell you why Izzy
yeah,
is sympathetic.
right,
So
right. Yeah, either you feel it or you
if
don't.
you
But
don't,
it's also an interesting point. It's also an interesting choice to put it into genre,
yeah,
because then in a way you've got some boundaries already in terms of the expectation that people are coming with. Like, did that feel like a comfortable thing for you, an uncomfortable thing for you, or were you glad
definitely,
to be in the boundaries of genre, or were you kind
yeah.
of
I will only do stuff within the boundaries of genre. I am just like, I find that I love writing from a deeply personal psychological place. But if I'm right, I never want to write a memoir. That feels so just I don't want to expose myself like that. It
yeah,
was so much easier for me to kind of have like the umbrella of the genre that just kept me safe. And I was just in this bubble of like, well, no matter what, this is a work of fiction. Vampires aren't real. So I can express myself however I need to make it feel honest, but also
yeah,
vampires aren't real. So don't come for me. So
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No, it's like I don't know. This, I think, partially because of your combination of extreme realism with the depiction of the mother-daughter relationship and
Mhm.
the use of, the vampire genre, it really strikes you in the treatment. Was there anything about the reception of this or things you worked out in this that colored the way you then approached First Light or
Definitely. Although I will say that like I was mostly done with First Light, the big first draft of it when Night's Edge came out. So I didn't have a lot of time to like recalibrate much of anything, but I just kind of knew how I wanted to wrap Mia's story up. I always did. So all I could really hope for was that like I could stick that landing, give the audiences a poignant ending that was earned. And, not just I'm trying not to spoil anything, but like make it a really dark, twisty ride, but then like end up in a place where you want Mia to end up
yeah, yeah,
because the first one doesn't end happily or with any kind of resolution that feels satisfying, and that was on purpose.
yeah,
I do think a lot of people didn't know there was going to be a second one, so the first one, like just boom, ending the way it does is
right.
so upsetting, and people were like, "What the hell are you doing?" And I was like,
Did
"Just
you know? Did you know
what?"
that there was going to be a second one?
I didn't know.
Okay.
I just wrote the first one and we sold that. And my editor wanted to do two books. And she was like, have you thought about where this could go? And I hadn't thought about it a lot. But in that moment, I was like, well, of course, yeah. I mean, we have a lot of other stuff we could absolutely do. Had I walked in with a duology? No, I hadn't.
Wow.
So I got really, really lucky that she
Right.
asked for one off the bat. I also don't think I would have gotten one, candidly, had it been like a year later, I don't think I would have gotten one. Um, I feel like there's been a certain allergy with sequels lately. Because I think they have diminishing returns, et cetera, et cetera. I see that that's true. So I think from a financial standpoint, because I was a new author with this imprint, they wouldn't have done it. But someone was feeling bold, and I got lucky that month, and they gave me one, and I was like, great,
So,
okay,
so they
cool,
gave you the two-book deal initially. Okay,
yeah,
interesting.
hmm
Yeah.
hmm
I mean, I feel like in publishing that's a cyclical thing. People get really excited about the multi-book deal and then they'll be like, no, that's a really bad idea. And then they'll get excited again.
Right. Well, they were like, "Oh, we'll give you a multi-book deal. We would like the second one to be a sequel to this." Um,
Right.
I could have said, "No, I want to write another second standalone," and it might have been fine. But like, the impetus for saying, can we do two, was because they wanted to encourage a sequel. Yes.
Well, let's go back to the fact that it started as a film. I feel like another, common question people ask is, how do you know whether something is a feature, a TV show, or a book? And like, what was your evolution with this project?
I knew pretty quickly after trying to break it as a feature that the ideas and the nuances I was trying to express through this character were gonna be tough to do visually unless I was directing, and I wasn't going to be able to because I just wasn't experienced enough, that no one was going to give me that kind of money. I was thinking really like rationally about what is going to be the most effective way for me to get my point across. Um, and I realized a book would be perfect. I actually wrote it as a short story at first to
Oh,
just
you
kind of
did.
get a feel for it, just to see like, can I find the voice? Can I find the vibe? Like what do I want this to feel like?
Did
Um,
anyone pick up on the short story?
yeah, well, my agent read it and she loved it. And she was just
Okay.
like, so is this what you're thinking that longer book could be? And I was like, yeah, it could be, this could be. And she was just like, yes, I very much think you should just run with this,
Okay.
just make this a
Nice.
book. And I was like, oh, I might submit it to some magazines. And she was like, you could do that, or you can just write this as a book and like really go for it. So that
Oh,
was
okay. So
good.
she was ready to sell it based on the short story.
Yeah, yeah, but she needed me to write a manuscript because
Yeah.
that's how it goes.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. But that's great. I mean, because again,
yeah.
I think that a lot of people just don't even know how to start. So you often recommend like try a short story, see if
Yeah.
catches any attention.
It was really low pressure. It was more just to see if I had it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if I could accomplish what I was trying to accomplish in the feature that wasn't hitting. If I had, yeah, a vessel for telling the story correctly. And I
So had you written the entire feature at all or no?
no,
Oh, no.
I'd written a chunk of it, and then I'd applied to like, some screenwriting grants and stuff, like low budget, like film
Okay.
independent things, Sundance Labs, like stuff like that, with like the chunk I had and then a treatment and a proposal. So I like
Okay.
knew I would had a really good proposal. I knew what I wanted to do.
Yeah,
It was just the execution was like, ooh, or
yeah,
do we really know? So no.
yeah. So then how did it go backwards into development? So now you had this book. How did the whole development deal come about in terms of it being a TV show? And was there any question, like, did you try to sell it back as a feature since that's how it originated or?
I because it originated as a feature and I had struggled initially to crack it that way, my instinct was to go out with it for television and focus on that, because I had a sense that like, well, if I've got space, if I'm telling this story over the course of 8 to 12 episodes, I've got room to explore these nuances and these character relationships a little better. So I think like this could work for TV and I see it better for TV. So that was how that happened. And the book itself is written in a way that I think is pretty cinematic. Like I have a lot of set piece moments. Um,
Yeah, you
you
do.
know, there's a lot of it that is like, even though Mia's monologue internally it's very self-contained, the world is big. So there's a lot going on around her that we were, easily able to picture and use. So now the fact that it got snapped up, like that's just luck. That just I can only control what I wrote and the choices I made, right? So like I wrote something that I knew would be easy to visualize, and I wrote a character that I knew people would like and understand.
Okay.
And I also had two roles for young, well, because Izzy, the mom, stops aging in her early 30s. So she's a role for like a young woman. And then
Right.
Mia's 23. So I had these two roles for young women that
And
could,
Jade, you had Jade.
and Jade, yeah, who could be a cool musician or something. Like there was clear casting opportunities. And
Right.
there's a really creepy villain. I knew what I was doing. So I was like, this is castable the characters are sympathetic. We can do this. And it's a world you can imagine. It's vampires. We know vampires generally work, but it's a new twist. So yeah, I lined up all those dominoes and I was like, I know that this could work in theory. So hopefully
Right.
someone else sees that.
Right.
Um, that's all that's in the writer's control.
I
I
love it.
don't,
I love how thoughtful you are though about this process. I think there are some people where it's not as well. I think this is the advantage of knowing screenwriting and knowing book writing is that you can be thoughtful in this way. You can say like, okay, I know what they're going to look for, you know, if it comes to this. And so I'm going to put that in. So
yeah. So that was, yeah, when you're in the development trenches in film and television for a while prior to this, you start thinking about everything you've heard people say they're looking for, and you're like, aha, what if I just sort of give that to you and just put it on a plate? Um, so I did that and it did pay off. I had a really great opportunity to work with another client that my TV agent represented who had just signed a really great deal over at 20th, and she was bringing in some lovely projects and mine got to be one of them. So that happened really, really quickly and kind of like threw me for a loop, and it was very cool. Like, to be honest, it was just kind of confusing. And I had a lot of like learning to do really fast about like, so what does this mean? And also part of the deal was, and my agents were like, okay, well, if you want to do it this way, it might take a while. But I was like, I am a screenwriter. I want a crack at this pilot. I
okay.
want to
That
be
was going to be
writing.
my next question. Did you even formulate a pitch or was it just literally bought off the book and
It was
nothing?
it was bought off the book, and then after having just a positive meeting just with me as the writer, um, there was a stupid amount of trust put in me at first. No, I'm not going to say stupid. I earned it.
I was
But
going to say,
I
don't
was
be stupid.
but looking back, I was very, very fortunate to have some really awesome, trustworthy people go to bat for me. And I was so thankful because, a lot of times when the novelist just kind of walks in there and like slams on the table and says, I'm writing this, they're like, okay, sit down. We'll
I've seen
talk.
that backfire on a lot of people whose shows
Yeah.
are now coming out 20 years later, but they didn't initially.
Yeah. And I mean, granted, as time went by and well, okay, so this is like later on. I'll save this save that
No,
part of the
go
story.
ahead. You can say it now.
But
Well,
it's out of order. So like the first thing that happened was like, so 20th optioned the books,
okay.
and then had a deal with me as the screenwriter that if they sell it, this is what they'll pay me to write the show and what my positioning will be and all that stuff. So all that was worked out before we took it to pitch. But what was very nice about that deal was like I got paid on the option no matter what because the
Oh,
studio
nice.
bought it.
Yeah.
So even if we didn't sell it to any network or streamer, I would still get paid on the option on the books, which was incredible. So I was so thankful. That's because not it doesn't always go that way.
No, it does
No.
not. Yeah.
So that's like the double-edged sword of working with a huge studio, right? Where it's like on one hand, if they like something, they have the money to just give it to you. On the
Right.
other hand, that means Mickey Mouse owns your soul and there will be consequences down the
So
line.
did they pair you up immediately or how did that work?
Well, so me and it was Jack Schaefer was the executive producer on that, and she was the one who
It
brought
is
the
one
project
division.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she was lovely, and so she was the one who brought it in and was working, in tandem with me. And it wasn't clear for a while that whether how she and I would work together if it got picked up. We wanted to work together, but scheduling being what it was kind of wild. So when we brought the pitch out, we attached a director. So Leslie Headland was involved and was attached to direct the pilot and then be an EP. So she was involved with the pitch to, just give it more value. We were thinking about attaching talent at the time, but we were like, let's just see how it does without it. This was 2021.
Okay.
It's so different trying to sell a show right now. We
Do you think
couldn't.
you would have had to have the talent now?
Yeah. Yeah, we would have had to have had all four of those characters like cast already with like A-listers.
Yeah.
Yes. Despite having really great auspices, you know, as EPs with me. No.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. But it was also really nice though. It just hit at a really good time. Again, timing was everything. We ended up taking it only to Hulu and Freeform.
Okay.
And it ended up just being that at that time. So Freeform, you know, as we all know as TV people, has always had this reputation of being very YA, very
Yep.
cookie cutter. It was not really my choice. It was not my first choice to go there.
Although
Because
they do have like also a history of of adapting, books like Pretty
yeah,
Little Liars and the rest of it.
right. So the reason that I eventually was sold on them when they made an offer was that they wanted to make a plan to sort of like reach a new demographic, rebrand some of their programming. They wanted something that could skew older and more mature and more complex, but also, you know, could feed their bread and butter. So they're like, well, it's vampires still, and there's a young woman coming of age, but there's all this other stuff that's very adult. And I was like, yeah, so if you respect the darkness of the show and you respect the adult elements of the show, I'm game.
Okay.
So at first that kind of seemed like an awesome situation because they were going to kind of use this show as one of the ones to like catapult them into a different, wider demographic. So I was like, cool, yeah, let's do that. So let's push the envelope and let's have fun. Um, and it was for a while, but what was kind of happening was during that year I was developing, there were so many changes
Yeah.
at that network and at that studio. Like I would I would finish an outline and I would turn it in and everyone would be like, "Yay, this is great. Well, you know, we'll get you notes in a little while." Then a whole month would go by like crickets and I'd be like, I thought they liked the outline. What are we doing?" And then I would get the news that like the mandates were shifting. And they're like, "We love this outline. We love what we're thinking of doing, but can Mia be in high school?" And I'm like, "Well,
Oh,
no,
no.
because that makes it a YA show." And I said, "That's not what we're making."
Right.
Like, no. So that's an example of just like sometimes you set up a show somewhere that seems like an awesome fit at the time and it makes sense and you're all on the same page, but the mandates change so fast. And sometimes you'll also get on a note Zoom with like three new people who you don't even know, and you're like, "Where's what's his face? Oh, he was laid off. I didn't know that." Like, now this is your team. Okay. Like that can happen too.
Wow. Wow. You
Yeah.
really got everything going on with this.
And then, so then around the time that Bob Iger came back to Disney, so that would have been like late 2021, early 2022, um, I had turned in my second draft of the script at that point, and they were shifting their goals again. And they decided to have another writer come in and take a crack at what I was doing, which I wasn't psyched about. Uh, and then that ended up not working anyway. And then so I did two more drafts with her and we co-wrote and we came to a great place. We figured it out. Um, and I was honestly, I mean, I'm being very candid with you and like with your viewers here because I know they're all, you know, TV writers and authors. I was very frustrated that they made me kind of take a back seat for 3 months when ultimately just having us co-write a draft or two ended up being the best instead of literally leaving me off of emails, disinviting me to Zooms. Like,
Yeah.
what?
I mean,
It wasn't great.
yeah,
Um,
and you hear about this a lot in feature world where, sometimes it's just literally the more experienced writers anyway are dropping notes to each other independently because
yeah,
they're like, is there anything, you know?
yeah. So ultimately I was like, so all you did by making me take a back seat was make me mad. And now I'm just mad, but I'm gonna do the work because I'm a big girl. And and we did it. And so we actually ended up with a script that everyone liked, and it all was okay at the end. Everyone was getting along. We were having fun again. I was like, oh, thank God. And then we went on strike.
Oh my goodness.
And that was kind of the end of the road, because that was our fifth draft that we turned in the day before the strike.
Oh my goodness. Oh my
So
goodness.
yeah.
Wow. And so what happened when they came back? They were just like not moving forward. Done.
So Freeform stopped producing scripted content.
Oh, they did.
Was
Okay.
part of the post-strike shift that occurred at
Right.
Disney.
CW and
A
yeah.
lot of those networks just kind of got,
Yeah.
and so the strike ended, and we had heard nothing but good energy about our last draft. So we were all kind of looking at each other like, this could go any day now. Yes, and the strike's over. Cool. Let's all just wait. And we waited and waited and waited and waited. And then finally we got the news that they were like, yeah, we actually can't make any of these now. So sorry.
No, I think I didn't say it completely stopped. I just thought it was like, cut back. Wow. Okay.
No, yeah. So they weren't making anything anymore. Even things that had been on the air previously that had done really well were canceled. So
Well, again,
Whee!
CW analogy here.
Yeah, yeah. So
Just canceled their most popular show yesterday.
really, wait, what was it?
Walker.
No way. Oh, I didn't read that. Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah.
Yeah, everything's crazy. Black
It's
is white, cats are
life
dogs.
is cray cray right now. It really is. I think everybody's just kind of like, all right, well, yeah, okay. So next.
Yeah. So then my option ran out before we could really successfully get it set up anywhere else. And it was for the best, I think, because I also knew that the script we developed specifically for Freeform and all those mandates that we had to appease all at once, that specific script wasn't going to work anywhere else.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And so I was like, I don't know if anyone's going to pick it up with this script. And that was
Okay.
true.
So basically, if someone does pick it up, it's going to be, starting from the beginning
Yeah.
on.
And I'm fine with that, because honestly, like, I've learned so much during those 2 years of working on this that was just like, you you will change so many things about it. I was expecting to have to change like locations and timelines and the way events unfolded on screen, make things more cinematic, like all those things you expect to do when you adapt. But there was so much more going on behind the scenes in terms of just like meeting demand and mandate and demographic and making this person's boss happy by changing this one sequence.
Right. So
So
did you end up feeling like you had to fundamentally change character, or was that the one sacrosanct thing? No.
I fought really, really, really hard for my characters. And I think in the end, I found a happy medium, and I was proud that we were all able to come to that place. Because there was a lot of conversations about likability that were happening, which when you have a female
Bill,
driven
it's
show,
amazing.
amazing how quickly that comes up. So everything you and me were talking about earlier with Izzy came up every time we had a meeting. And I was like, we will have time to let this character open up and explain more about her. It's okay if she's an antagonist. This show requires antagonists.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
then there was a conversation of, well, then, the bad guy, so Devin, her ex-boyfriend, the one who turned her initially, like, he's really the big bad of the whole series. He's
Right.
really the antagonist. So I was like, okay, well, if you don't want Izzy to be an antagonist, if you want to root for her right off the bat, that's also fine. But then you have to bring him into the story more, because he wasn't really in the pilot. So I
Yes.
was like, then you have no villain. So what are we doing? Because I overall had a good experience. I just feel like it was chaotic. But the people
I
I
think
worked with were
it's
very
common.
good.
Yeah. What I figured out over the years is like this is exactly what happens in development. Like maybe once you get the characters created and you're literally writing for a show, then there is a mold and a template, and you're trying to just hew to that showrunner's vision. But if
Yeah.
you're trying to sell a pilot, I think it's just that, or even like with features, a lot of it is being able to take the notes and just go with the directions.
Yeah, I had a really I've been quoting this a lot lately because I've been having these conversations a lot. Um, the author Holly Black said this on a panel we were on last year, and she's had a lot of her work adapted, like Spiderwick Chronicles is coming out, da 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 da. And she said the number one thing about adaptation that she learned was it's a lot like making cookies, and you have to make sure that the thing that comes out of the oven is still a cookie. And they might ask you to substitute chocolate chips for raisins. They might ask you to make it vegan. Fine. But if they, get rid of sugar or flour or baking powder, and what comes out of the oven is like a biscuit or sludge, it's not a cookie, well, that's when you have a problem. So like she was saying, like, decide on day one what makes it a cookie. And I think that was what was really tricky in this particular process, because I thought I was super clear about like what our vision was, and my whole, creative team and I were all on the same page with that. Like, this is how we see this character in this world. Here are the things that are the most important things to us. And those things still ended up on the table for discussion. So it's hard to even, because when the mandate changes at the tippy tippy top, you're just
Yeah,
like, I
well,
told you we can't do that, but he said we have to.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
we do. Yeah.
exactly.
It is
No,
what
and
it
I
is.
think that's 100% true. And
Yeah.
like I said, I don't know that I'm trying to think of like a publishing process where we would change somebody's stuff. Well, I guess sometimes you do. You end up kind of radically
Yeah.
redoing it. But
I've never been so in publishing, what is cool is like there's just less bullshit. Like, if you submit a manuscript to an editor and they buy it and they like it enough to buy it,
yeah,
that means they are not going to go in on day one and say, but yes, we're going to change the whole second half of this, and we want this boy to be a girl, and da 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 da. Like, they bought it because they generally like what you got.
yeah, yeah. And
So
I guess I would just make the distinction between fiction and nonfiction, because it does happen in nonfiction where things will get completely
yeah,
around, but that's because it's bought off proposal, not
I was just
manuscript.
gonna say, yeah, and that's why my agent prefers if I finish a whole darn manuscript, even though it takes longer, because
Yeah,
I'm like, well, now they know everything you have.
right, exactly. So do you have any advice for people? Is there anything that you feel like you learned from all this that you would say, do this or watch out for this? Or
I think the cookie advice is still one of my favorite things to say. Decide, like, that's purely for like adaptation, especially if you're adapting your own work. Really, like, have your come to Jesus before you even start, and just know what makes it what it is.
right.
And also, if you're writing a book and you want it to be a film or a television show someday, and you like have that cinematic mind, and you are like, you and me, where you straddle both arenas, then think about that right when you're writing your first draft. What are my set piece moments? What characters are the audience members really going to care about? How can I externalize what I know is internal, to make people be able to visualize it as a movie? Do
Right.
that work for them, because when an exec reads, they don't want to do any work. They just want to be sucked in by your story and get excited by it. So don't make them imagine what those moments could be. Just give it to them.
Right.
And that'll work, hopefully.
So you did that thing which is really popular in books right now, anyway, the dual timeline approach.
Right.
Like,
Uh,
what made you, given everything you're saying about how you were thinking about adaptation from the beginning, what made you go with dual timeline? What did you enjoy about it? What advice do you have about it? What did you not enjoy?
I love dual timelines, and I will never disavow them. They're the most fun to write. And I love putting those puzzle pieces together and being like, the present day asks a question, and then immediately the past answers that question, and they go hand in hand. Because with character building, you're like, why is this person like this? Oh, I see. That's why he's like this. Okay. So it's really, to me, it makes perfect sense to write that way, and it's fun for me. I get bored when I'm in one timeline. And in First Light, I made it even more of a puzzle box where I used time to kind of like misdirect and plant seeds and make it more of a mystery, which felt more TV. Like that is the way TV will use jumping timelines to be like, what was that? Oh my God, now I know what that meant. So I was thinking more that way. Um, I love dual timelines. I don't care. Like, I'll use them in a feature script too. I think as long as they're both very compelling and that they each have their own arc,
Yeah,
that it's not just flashbacks for flashback's sake, that
yeah.
you are like, I'm following this storyline because this is also as interesting as what's going on in the present and also gives context. There's a
Are
way
you
to
one
do
of
it.
those people who like literally, boards it and creates the timeline,
Yeah,
the dual timeline of it all to keep track and
especially in First Light, for anybody who has read that, it is like there are very specific scenes that need to go exactly where they go, or the whole house of cards comes down. So that's been like really, really interesting.
yeah.
Sorry,
Well,
my dog is getting excited about something. Okay, it's okay.
about dual timelines, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
no, and that's very directory, right? Because you're already thinking of the intercut and you're already planning like, okay, this one is gonna end here and has to segue in here.
Yeah, so in that way, it's another part of the cinematic planning of a book where you're like, well, I want them to see it the way I see it. So
Yeah.
that twist will be fun on screen too, hopefully. So
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, I like it a lot.
I got a lot of pushback on the childhood stuff when we were developing the show.
Oh, you
And
did.
I did. And the agreement we kind of came to was we were having like really atmospheric, very creepy flashbacks to her childhood in the pilot that gave it all context, but that later we were going to do like a really big, like maybe a bottle episode just about her that
Oh,
4 months in her childhood. Um, but in the pilot, they didn't want a ton of her as a kid.
and was that partially about casting or just getting people attached to Mia from
Just
the
yeah, just getting people attached to her. Yeah, because I asked that. I was like, oh, is this like because you don't want to cast a child? And they're like, no, we just don't like flashbacks. I was like, okay.
I think a lot of it is it can get distracting in a pilot. You only have so much time to really
Yeah.
get people hooked on your character and you want them, sort of with their goal moving forward.
Hmm.
So that people
Hmm.
can be like, oh, okay.
Yeah. But the flashbacks were also tied into establishing the villain. And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about. I'm like, yeah, well, if you get rid of the flashbacks, then you don't have the villain. You never see this guy. So how do you know him? It
So
was
what was
great.
your solution? Did you put him into the pilot? You did.
A little like everything was just meeting in the middle over and over. Because sometimes we'd overcorrect. Like there was a version of it where he was in it too much and they were like, this got crazy, pull back. And then like, so you just, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think development is for people who actually genuinely just love puzzles and story because
I love puzzles. Yes.
it just becomes like, let's just redo the puzzle then.
I have
So
no problem with that part of development. The part of development that drives me up a wall is just, the secret society of corporate culture that the writers are not privy to and learning that everything's different today. That's
yeah.
what I don't like.
Yeah, unfortunately that happens in publishing too sometimes.
Yeah,
So what's next?
indeed. Well, I'm writing a new book. I'm like 75% of the way done with the manuscript. I'm really quite happy with it, but I'm taking my time. I had a really intense year with like First Light coming out, and I was just preoccupied a lot. I had, just some stuff going on in my life. I really have taken my time with this next book. I also think I'm slightly moving away from horror and maybe into something a little more like thriller mainstream that still has genre elements. So for that reason, I think I'm constructing something that will end up probably at a new imprint. Um,
Oh, okay. So
yeah,
not vampires, not any of the.
no, no. And I never like set out to be a horror writer, so it was kind of like interesting that that's where it ended up, but like ultimately I love doing grounded character-driven genre stuff. So
Okay.
like that's kind of what this new one is.
Oh,
Um So that's why I'm writing the whole thing, and we're not trying to sell on proposal or anything. We have to really figure out what it
So
is.
you're almost starting over, like you're gonna send it out more widely and the rest of it.
Yeah. And I'm okay with that, because it is a little bit of a pivot. So
Yeah. No, it can really work in your favor. I think, well, so another one of our YouTube casts was with Julie Clark,
mm,
who took my develop your novel class when I very first arrived in LA, even before I started teaching screenwriting. And it was
wow.
funny because at the time she was working in a very, very grounded like family story that had some science in it. And we kind of like, I was like, it needs a little bit more of a high concept.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
and then she did a pivot. She got it published with a mainstream publisher, but you know, it was one of those experiences. She did a pivot into thrillers and she has loved it.
Yeah, you just
Her
never know.
books have been best-selling. Like she's just had this really great experience being a thriller writer.
That's
So
amazing. I love hearing that. Yeah, I mean, I think that Night's Edge found its audience, and I love like my readership is just like the most lovely people in the world.
yeah.
But I think like the horror community never really considered it a work of horror. And so there was a little bit, it
Yeah.
was just not always the fit that we thought it was going to be marketing wise. And so I think that like I can do better. I'm gonna
You're
try again.
like, I can do better. You have to listen to the publishing categories because it is how they market the stuff.
Yep.
But you also can't get like completely caught up in it because like that kind of feedback will make you
Yeah.
it's kind of
Hmm.
like the thing is that all the best stuff crosses, right? You know, like when I
Totally.
first read Carrie, I don't even know that I thought about it. I don't read, you know, I wasn't like, oh, I'm a horror fan. I just read it as like the story of, you know, a tortured teen, which I could totally relate to.
No. I also think if Carrie came out today and were written by a woman, people would try to say it was YA.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say. Like, I think there's like a way in which, like, you know, the books just kind of have to stand on themselves. But that said, I do think if there's a good fit with you and the marketing category, like that can be a dream because,
You
you
never
know,
know. Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
but I think what you did was very much appreciated by a lot of people. And I
Thank
think
you.
that, you know, I mean, especially I think too, like I get kind of antsy about this with women. Like just because it's a woman's story doesn't mean it's not X. You know? Anyway, but that's really exciting. So, and then what about the TV rating and screenwriting? Like, or do you try for those jobs independently, or are you just kind of like, nope, I'm on this. I'm
I do when they're great. Like I recently got sent something the other day that I loved, and I was just like, yeah, I'll go pitch for this. This sounds awesome. But I won't always do it because it's a lot of, this was something we all talked about during the strike, where like going out for OWAs or like going up for staffing, like sometimes you end up doing free work just to get the job. And
yeah,
that's not allowed to happen anymore. And you know, I've been doing this for almost 10 years now, and I've done a lot of free work to get a job, and I'm just
yeah,
not doing that anymore.
yeah,
Um, Also the strike, honestly, like not to be a downer, not to end this on like, ugh, but like the strike kind of derailed my career in a huge way. Like I was at a really different point in my life and in my career in May of 2023 than I am right now. Because at that time I had a very like nice deal at a network where I was developing a show. I had just turned in my final draft. People were feeling confident and happy. Um, and then I didn't work again. I haven't worked since then at
right.
all.
Which
So
is unfortunately not uncommon.
I know. So like, I'm only just now starting to like hear about things starting up again that could be a good fit for me. So I'm like, oh my God, it took this long.
I was gonna
So
say, well, I am glad we're having this conversation this month because I do feel like we are starting to see more signs of things picking up and certainly
mhm.
more development happening and more things being announced. So
Yeah,
hopefully this is the beginning of the renewal or
gotta
something.
be. It's gotta be. The strike ended so long ago. It is May. Oh,
Well,
come
but
on.
it really didn't have anything to do with the strike in that sense. I mean, I think that they, you know, I watched this thing on YouTube and it was a presentation somebody had done at South by where they had like charts and graphs, and they showed that the contraction had started way before the strike. It's just that people weren't really processing it because, again, like you say, like it's not like all the corporate suites are broadcasting like, oh, we're having a contraction in our income. Oh, we didn't get that
Right.
kind of advertising for this. Oh, this show didn't get that streaming deal, so they can't, make
Yeah.
their money back. So I think it was already the numbers, it was already coming in.
No, I mean, I think that getting the gains we did ultimately will be great for me and all of us 5 years down the line, of course. I just kind of associate the contraction with the strike because I have been out of work for a year,
Because
regardless of which thing caused
it's
it.
how which
I've
is
been
how
out of
a
work for a
lot of
year.
people, but I just want to be really, really clear that, to the people who don't know a lot about this, that it was not cause and effect. It was really
No.
literally like bad timing
Yeah.
in that way, or good timing, like I said, if you think about it in terms of like, the timing to secure the gains.
Yeah, I feel very ready to just go out with a bunch of new stuff. Just it feels good. It feels like a good time. So I'm putting positive energy out there for
There's
sure.
good.
Mhm.
Is there anything I should have asked you that you wanted to talk about that I didn't?
No, I mean, I think this was amazing. We covered so much ground, and I just really hope that like all of your viewers and the folks that you're working with got something out of this and that I wasn't just rambling for an hour.
No, no, this is great. It's a lot of great information, and we just want to encourage everybody to check out Night's Edge and First Light and all of Liz's stuff. She's an incredible writer, and I think especially for people who are trying to straddle the divide, like you're such a great example to point to, because I mean, actually, for all the reasons you were just saying, where you're consciously doing some of these more cinematic things. It's showing off in your books and in your characters because your playwriting background
Yeah, it's all
with such a I mean, it's funny because you would say like maybe like, oh, well, maybe that's why the horror people didn't find it super harrowing. But I would say it's like your strength that you have these characters we get so involved with.
yeah, I hope. Yeah, I think that there's an audience for what I'm doing that is not that niche. So I'm hoping, yeah.
And that's why I'm saying, and I think it's all really going to pay off with thrillers, because I will tell you that if you can construct the thriller plot with a really strong character, you've hit the home run. So
Fingers crossed. Oh, so close.
from my
Hopefully,
lips,
a year from now, we'll be talking again, and we'll be talking about that one, and I'll actually finish it.
exactly.
Finish it.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Liz. That was so great.
Thanks for having me. This was so awesome.